day. My name is Joanna Leone, and I am the membership manager here at WERC, now powered by MHI. Thank you for taking time out of your schedule to join us for today's presentation. Today's webinar is being recorded and all participants are in listen-only mode. At the end of today's presentation, we will have a question and answer period. You will be able to ask your questions through the Q&A or chat section located at the bottom of your screen or along the right-hand side, depending on your settings. So without further ado, I would like to turn the presentation over to today's moderator, Jim Chamberlain.
Thank you, Joanna. Today we are going to continue our literary themed webinars. Today is War and Peace of the Pie for All, HR Insights. And we have to start with our disclaimer. The information discussed in this session represents the views of the individuals and does not constitute legal advice or the views of WERC. You should consult with your organization's leadership and legal counsel as needed for your specific situations. All right, I will be your moderator today, and Brenda Stoltz will be taking you through this presentation. Just a little bit about Alpine. We are a supply chain services company that focuses on supply chain systems, so WMS, LMS, TMS, HR solutions, training, standard operating procedures, best practices, warehousing consulting that takes a look at everything pretty much within your four walls: people, process, systems, and infrastructure. And then we also have our strategic planning pillar, where we're looking at distribution network analysis, strategic master plans, as well as equity and M&A. All right, so our goal for today is to learn more about engaging your employees through the most difficult part of the year. And we are entering that part of the year where things start to get crazy. And this year, probably more so than others, with all of the supply chain disruptions that we've been seeing. So our agenda is to how to prepare for a successful peak, engaging your employees, and routines that will help you get through this successfully. So I'm going to turn it over to Brenda and let her kick it off.
Awesome, thanks, Jim. So just a quick introduction, Brenda Stoltz. I'm one of the senior managing directors with Alpine Supply Chain, and I lead the HR solutions pillar. And I am excited to talk to you guys today about peak season. So I have about over 10 years of experience within supply chain. Already, majority of that time was at a distribution center for a large retailer, and I had both HR and operations roles there. So I have experience at both angles, right? I have experience from the operations side, where you just have more work than you know what to do with, and you're just trying to get everything out the door and either to a retail store to be sold, put on the shelves and sold, or to the customer, right? They want to make sure that they get the gift before Christmas or whatever the case may be. And I've been on the HR front too, where you're trying to really just make sure that you have the staffing and that you have the resources available to support the operation. So I know the joys and at times the feeling that you are in a war during peak season. So for the majority of supply chain companies, the peak season really is the October, I would say middle of October, all the way through December, right? We do have some probably smart companies that are more seasonality, maybe like schools, right? If you're more in a school system, your peak season might be in the summer. And so you can take everything that we discussed today and apply it to whatever month your peak season is, but we're really going to be focusing today, and the theme throughout our presentation is going to be about the upcoming holiday season. So ready or not, peak season is actually here. So we have 4 weeks until Black Friday and only 8 weeks until Christmas, which I'm not sure how that happened. I'm still trying to process 2020, to be honest. So the fact that we are in 2021 holiday season is just amazing. And with that, it also means that, all of our supply chain companies and retailers are getting prepared for a pretty amazing peak season. So retail sales last year, for pretty obvious reasons, saw actual decline, the first decline they've seen in a very long time. So 2.8% decline, and only saw sales was about 23.6 trillion. But in 2021, this figure is actually expected to rebound pretty healthily and go back to 2019 levels and be around 25 trillion. which, is something that we've probably experienced over the last 5 to 10 years, a pretty steady, healthy growth in the retail space. However, what we actually are seeing is a huge growth in e-commerce. And this isn't new. I think, Jim, you've probably experienced it with the clients that we worked with, but if they're in e-com, they've seen pretty steady, large double-digit growth for a while now, but 2020 was just something else, right? So obviously, if you can't go into a retail store, if you can't buy something, you're going to go online and you're going to go get it. And I'm sure we all heard about it. We, heard on the news the struggles that our supply chain really had to keep up with that demand. And all that was because of the 25% increase in e-commerce sales for a total of $4 trillion in 2020. And actually, we're expected to increase that even more this year. So in 2021, e-commerce sales are forecasted to climb even further by 16.8% to almost $5 trillion this year, which is pretty amazing. Definitely should be a win for a lot of clients and a lot of companies out there, but will be a challenge to make sure that they're prepared to get through it. So with that, how do you ensure that everyone gets a piece of the pie, right? So I said, we're talking trillions of dollars, which is great, right? Could be a win-win, win for the companies really trying to sell that inventory, and a win for the consumer that's trying to get that toy that your 5-year-old has been wanting all year, or even just stuff that you're trying to get for yourself to prepare for the peak season, right? Well, how do you make sure that your employees are excited about it as well, right? So obviously, as a large corporation, if you are able to meet those sales and are able to meet that demand successfully, you're going to celebrate that. You're going to see it in your year-end results. You're going to see it in your profit margin. But you want to make sure that your team also feels like they played an important role in that, right? And that you don't just feel like they got lost in the shuffle and they were just, victims as you tried to push those millions of dollars out the door. So with that, the biggest thing that we say you got to make sure that you do is prepare, right? Make sure that you prepare for your peak season and you take into account the volume throughput. So what is the volume going to look like specifically, not only for your company, but for your site or for your own individual team? If you're a supervisor, maybe working a night shift, what is it really going to mean for you? What staffing do you need to support that volume that you're expecting? And then how are you going to make sure that you support and engage your team through that? And that's a little bit of what we're going to be discussing over the next few slides. So throughput planning, right? What does that mean? Well, at Alpine, we like to say you have to start with the data. And this is also true for volume throughput and peak season planning. You have to make sure that you look at last year's numbers. You have to look at, what your forecasted sales are for this year, and then really try to use that as a data point and then really understand the story behind it, right? Most companies do some type of lessons learned after peak season, so make sure that you dust off those notes and really read through what went well last year, what didn't go well, so that you can try to prepare for it this year. Maybe review and talk to employees. If you weren't there last peak season, talk to employees that were and can give you that insight if you don't necessarily have it, right? Really understand how efficient was your warehouse last year, what went well, what didn't go well, so that you can make adjustments. And with that, make sure that you break down a peak season forecast weekly, right? So once you actually have a forecast, make sure that you're going through it and you're saying, okay, week by week, what are going to be our heaviest volume weeks? What are going to be our lowest volume weeks, so that you can review the hours of operation, right? So there are times, and we do have clients that know that typically, they run 5 days a week, and most of the time they're off weekends, or maybe they only run 2 shifts. But when you look at those volumes, you realize you're probably going to have to add some coverage to the weekends. You may have to add a 3rd shift. And so you want to make sure that you're prepared for that well in advance, so that you can make those adjustments and you can let your employees know if they're going to be working a different shift, right? Create a capacity plan, right? So obviously you're going to get a lot more orders out that door, but that also means that you're going to be receiving a lot more volume, right? Make sure that you understand when that volume is going to be coming in and how are you going to put it within your warehouse to make sure that it's stored efficiently and effectively, so that when you need it, you know exactly where you get it from, and that it doesn't create additional congestion and cause any kind of safety hazards in your facility, right? Have plenty of supplies on hand, right? So obviously, if you're going to be shipping more orders, that means you're going to need a lot more shipping boxes, maybe poly bags, labels, pens, pencils, really you name it, right? You're going to have a lot more people in the warehouse trying to get everything out, so you need to make sure that you have those supplies on hand. And again, I just talked about, our supply chain has recovered, but there are still some challenges. Make sure that you're ordering that well in advance of when you need it. So hopefully by this point, being the fact that it's almost Halloween, everybody has already gotten that order in on hand. Maintenance and downtime schedule and complete preventative maintenance for your most critical systems, right? So the worst thing that you have is, and Jim, as an engineer, you might have experience to this, right? The worst thing that can happen is you have one of your highest volume days and everything is going great, and then all of a sudden you have a conveyor that breaks down, or you have a scanner that's not working properly, and you have to deal with that while you're still trying to get you're trying to get orders at the door, and you have now people standing around because you're trying to fix inventory, right? So make sure that before you get into peak season, you're really looking at your most important systems, and you're doing all of the maintenance, all of the preventative measures that you can to make sure that they're optimal and that perform the best during your peak season. And then lastly, create a plan for challenges and constraints, right? So you can have a plan for all of this, but you know what? You may still run out of boxes because you didn't realize that your small boxes were going to go out. You're going to have more smaller orders this year than you did last year. You may find that you're not going to be able to fit everything within your facility, and so you need to have a plan to figure out, maybe you need to store some stuff in the yard, or maybe you need offsite storage, what that looks like. So have those constraints and plans in place so that you can quickly make changes if you do come upon a challenge during the middle of peak season. Staffing, right? So when it comes to staffing, I would say the most important thing, and this is not only for peak season, but year long, is to have a strategic staffing strategy. So what exactly is a strategic staffing strategy, right? Pretty fancy words, I would say, but it really comes down to, hey, do you really understand your current and your future business objectives, right? And now that you have those objectives, aka volume, sales growth, whatever the case may be, do you really understand what your workforce needs to look like, both from a permanent and a temporary employee perspective, to support those business objectives, right?
And one thing I'd just like to add on that is we're seeing more of the gig economy within the supply chain, within our warehouses and distribution centers. So there's more and more companies that are attracting seasoned, trained, experienced forklift operators, order pickers. And with these new models, you actually get the chance to evaluate that person's performance on previous gigs to understand the type of talent and employee that you can expect if you need them in a pinch. So a lot of new business models are surfacing, and it's just like the Uber or the other type of things that you see on the transportation side.
No, definitely. Thanks, Jim. And with that, and I think this is what you're talking about can really help you, is really help you understand your needs, right? What do your current employees actually look like? What skills do they have? What kind of training plan do you need to have in place to make sure that hey, I have 100 people, now I know that I need to hire another 50, or I need to hire another 80, or whatever the case may be, right? You need to create both a long and a short-term staffing plan, right? And those staffing plans should really include, obviously, your volumes. What are they going to look like? And they probably should realistically include, I would say, 2 to 3 scenarios of volumes, right? Like, what should my staffing look like if the volume meets the forecast? What if it comes 10% above forecast? What if it comes in 15% above forecast, to make sure that you really understand what it would do to your staffing, right? So that as you start to get into peak season, if you start to see, what, we're really hitting our volumes, I feel good, we've got the staffing, I don't need to adjust my hiring plan. But if you start to see that, week 1, we were 10% over, or week 2, we're 10% over, well, now you want to quickly know, okay, I need to adjust my staffing plan because the original staffing plan that I had is not going to be able to support the needs. You should also include availability, right? What does availability mean? It means that you're, a very simple staffing model would say, I have to get, have 100,000 orders that I need to get out in any given month. I know that an employee's performance is X. You do a simple division, and this is how many FTEs I need, right? Well, those FTEs, though, are 100% full-time FTEs. What you need to do is make sure that you're taking into account that your employees are human. right? And the human factor is they want to have vacation, right? They have doctor's appointments, they become ill, their kids become ill, right? And now with COVID nowadays, right, they may feel symptoms and you don't want them at work. And so you need to make sure that you factor that in, and a good staffing model will have a factor in there so that you know that your availability needs to be adjusted based on what your workforce is reflecting. Attrition and turnover is another one, right? Obviously, and unfortunately, we know that today that is a real challenge for a lot of supply chain companies. And so you can't simply create a plan and say, well, I have 100 people, I know that I need 150. I hire 50 over the next 2 weeks, then I'll be good to go. That's not necessarily the case, because unfortunately, some companies are losing 25 people over the course of those 2 weeks, right? So instead of hiring 50, you should have been trying to hire 75 all along. So just making sure that you are taking that into consideration. And then lastly, if you have a really great staffing model, and staffing models that we at Alpine like to support our clients with, is you want to make sure that it also looks at flexibility within your staffing, right? Not only look at, full-time employees and how many full-time FTEs do I need, but also say, well, what if those employees are a mix of full-time employees, temporary associates, right? Maybe some seasonal employees and even some part-time people in there, because maybe they only want to work 1 or 2 days a week, whatever they may be, right? With today's labor market, it's really important as an employer to be flexible, right? If you really want to get the best employees out there, you want to make sure that you're meeting everyone's needs. And in today's world, that you have to be a little bit more flexible. And then after that, you create a hiring plan, right? So you know what your forecast is going to look like. You really understand those challenges. You also have a staffing plan where you know exactly what that's going to look like. Well, you now need to create a hiring plan, right? And what you need to take into consideration is, what's that post-hire timeline, right? Meaning, how long does it take you to bring that employee in the door? So if you know, based on your staffing model, that by October 15th, you're going to need 200 people and you're only at 180, how long does it take you to hire those 20 people, right? Is it 2 days? Is it 3 days? Is it a week, a month? That's really going to be dependent on the labor market that you're in. And you should be working with a team that's very well aware of what that is. Your job descriptions, make sure that your job descriptions are accurately depicts what you're looking for, right? If what you're looking for is a seasonal worker that's only going to come in and support your peak season for, say, 2 to 4 months, make sure that you put that on there, right? Because you want to attract the right talent. At the end of the day, you want to have the right person for the right seat. And that's going to, again, ensure that you have the right staffing to get you through peak season, right? And then create a training and onboarding plan. So obviously most companies already have a training and onboarding plan, but your peak season training and onboarding plan should look different. Why? Because again, the majority of the time, the hiring that you're doing during peak season, they're only going to be with you for a few months, right? And so you want that training to be very focused. You want it to be streamlined. You want it to be flexible, right? If you are bringing an employee in to only pack, well, you don't want to take them to your standard training plan that's going to teach them how to pick, that's going to teach them how to receive and then pack, right? You want to make sure that it's focused solely on what you need them to do. And then that you have a training team in place too, to help you support that, right? So most of the time during peak season, because of the shift in sales that you see for that very short amount of time, you tend to bring on a lot of new individuals very quickly. And that just feels different for your whole entire warehouse. So you need to make sure that you have individuals prepared to support that strategy. And then lastly, create a retention strategy, right? So now you've got all this work to figure out how many people you need to have, where you need to place them, how you need to train them, or you got to make sure that you try to keep them, right? Because it does no good if you hire them 2 weeks before peak season and then the week that you really need them is coming up and they decide they don't want to come back, right? So in order to do that, make sure that obviously you're checking in with them on a regular basis, but also take into consideration and to count maybe adding some bonuses to increase the retention and the attendance. So typical things that we see companies do nowadays is say, hey, you get a 90-day sign-on bonus, right? So if you stay with us for 90 days, at the end of 90 days, you're going to get an extra $1,000, extra $500, whatever the company decides. To again, try to incentivize those employees to really stay with you through the very critical time periods that you need. Another was an attendance, right? So I think 1 year we did actually, I have personal experience in this, we raffled off a TV, right? And so what we did is for every week that you had perfect attendance, you got to put a ticket in. So that means there was really no limit. If you had perfect attendance for the whole 12 weeks that we consider to be peak season, and you got 12 tickets in, and then at the end of peak season, we raffled off a TV. So it also makes it fun, right? Because you get to have kind of a celebration at the end. You get to raffle the TV, you get to give your employees prizes, and they get to really feel the recognition for their attendance as well. But then also be the employer of choice, right? So you can try to give away more, bonuses. You can try to give away some fun gifts and everything, but nothing is going to replace company culture. And so if the employees are not enjoying coming to work, if they're not feeling supported, if they don't feel like they know what they're doing, that they're being trained, it's not going to replace that, right? That's definitely the number one thing. And then, support and engagement, right? So create a motivational organization. So organization is only as strong as its employees. So make sure that you're prioritizing the appointment of staff, right? Really understand where those employees are going to be the best, what role they need to play within the peak season, and make sure that you're clearly communicating that to them and then recognizing their efforts. And then have a policy for motivation, right? So we'll get a little bit into strategies here in the next page, but for example, make sure that you're making their health and well-being a priority during peak season. From a support perspective, lead by example. So have planned all hands on deck days, right? And so that means that as you look at your 12 weeks peak season, what 4 or 5 days are probably going to be your craziest, right? They usually happen, for example, a day or two before Black Friday, right? Maybe a little bit before Christmas. Make sure that you plan it so that as a leadership team, you have planned to go out there and help them, right? Like actually work with your employees, go out there and get them excited about it. Make sure that you're connecting them to what you guys are trying to achieve at the end of the day, whether that's getting orders out in time, maybe receiving orders for the day, whatever that is, so that they feel the accomplishment that they support it and not only get bogged down on the work that they're doing, right? At the end of the day, you're probably asking them to do a little bit more, right? Because there's more volume in your warehouse, things are moving a little bit quicker, and that's okay, but you need to slow down and make sure that you're recognizing those efforts. And really, employees really like that. I know personally when I went out on the floor with my team and said, okay, we know that it's going to be an important day, it's going to get kind of crazy in here, but we're going to do it together. I saw a ton of engagement from them, and people are just excited, right? It makes work a little bit more fun, and it makes the 10 or 12-hour shifts go by just a little bit quicker. The other thing is be visible and available, right? So yes, you have your all hands on deck plan days, but realistically speaking, you have a job to do as well. So you can't be working with them alongside every single day, right? But what you do need to make sure that you do is really make yourself visible and available through peak season, so that if there are challenges, if they are maybe having some questions or problems, you're able to answer them, and they feel that you're available and they know when to expect to see you. And then lastly, follow up on any issues quickly, right? From an engagement standpoint, make sure that you create constant and consistent communication, right? So again, when you're talking about celebrating the fact that you're able to get 40,000 orders out in an 8-hour shift, or whatever your goal is for the day, make sure that you're letting them know why that is a goal, how that's contributing to the company total goal, how that's potentially going to help you guys in your long-term business plan. Connect it for them so that, again, they don't get lost in just the day-to-day monotony of the stuff that they're doing every single day. And then from a recognition standpoint, make sure that you're doing both individual and team rewards, and then all building celebrations, right? So something like simple, like getting everybody pizza, right? Everyone loves the free lunch. Everyone loves to just come in and celebrate a little, maybe create like a donut day, create pie day, whatever the case may be, to make sure that they feel appreciated.
And one thing, Brenda, that I just wanted to add there too, is that a lot of times people just think of money, but it's important to tap into your workforce to say, what would a recognition look like, and what would you like it to be, or what would the options be, so that they are a part of that decision, and then you're tapping into what is going to motivate them.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Deb. And I know, don't assume, right? So I'll give you an example. Again, worked at a large distribution center. Every year we had this like large banquet where we would like get it catered. It was like a really nice event. It was 3 or 4 course meal, and it'd be for the entire warehouse, right? But that costs a lot of money. And so we asked the employees, do you guys want to continue to do that, or would you rather take those funds and instead have smaller meals throughout the year, right? Meaning we could take what we're spending that once a year, and you could probably have 4 to 5 events throughout the year. We were surprised to learn that employees actually wanted the 4 to 5 meals, right? They wanted to come together more. They didn't really care if it wasn't as fancy of an event, if maybe the food wasn't catered and it wasn't, 3 courses or whatever it was, but they really just felt like it was better to have more frequent celebrations. So to your point, make sure that you're asking them, right? Like, what do they want? And then the other thing I would also say is, to your point, it's not always about money. And sometimes it's not always even about what food you're providing or what event, but it's about the fact that you're stopping and you're recognizing the contributions that they're doing for you and the team, right? So for example, yeah, maybe because of their shift, they're gonna work Christmas, right? We're not shut down on Christmas, whatever the reason may be. Maybe you're not a business that can support that, right? For example, if you're medical supplies, maybe it's really important, you can't support it, you're open 365 days a year. Yeah, you know that it's their shift and you know that unfortunately they have to work it, but you should still stop and acknowledge the fact that they're not spending the time with their families, that instead they showed up to work, and a simple thank you and acknowledgement of that goes a very long way. Next one is really just how do you avoid burnout, right? So really there's reports that show that burnout has increased like 33% in 2020, right? So how do you make sure that as you're going through peak season, as you guys are getting all these orders out, things getting hectic, your employees don't start to become burnout, right? Some of the top reasons that employees burn out today include lack of control. Maybe they have unclear or impossible job expectations and requirements. They feel that they work in a socially toxic place. They feel like there's too much of a demand, or there's a lack of workplace communication, right? And really all of these as a leader, you can control, right? Or have significant influence over, right? Socially toxic workplace. This is why it's important to follow up when someone makes a comment where maybe they say they're not happy with their leader, they're not happy with their coworkers. Make sure you ask the question, make sure you partner with HR. I have to say that, right? Partner with HR and really understand what's going on so that you can drive to the root cause of that and obviously solve it, right? Lack of workplace communication. Again, this is what I was talking about, where try to really connect it beyond their team, beyond their shift, beyond the building, and really say, look, as an organization, this is the goal that we're driving towards, and this is how your effort, your day-to-day work contributed to that, and that just goes such a long way. And then lastly, right, the easier part is just celebrate the wins, right? So communicate results at the company level, at the team level, make it a team win, really recognize the contribution to the total results. So I think I got a little ahead of myself, but that's where I was getting at. Some of the routines that, we think help you be pretty successful, right? And I would say, in order for these to be successful, make sure that you have these routines in place before you get into peak season, right? And that means have the calendar invites on the calendar, make sure you know who's leading what meeting, who's leading what activity, because as you get into the craziness of peak, sometimes those things can easily get pushed off to the side. From a staffing perspective, it's very important that on a yearly basis, you're really reviewing those, on a quarterly basis, you're reviewing the volumes, and then really review the number of employees that you have and create a monthly hiring plan for that. And then on a monthly basis, you really should be reviewing your staffing levels, your hiring trends to make sure that you make adjustments as necessary. And on a weekly basis, make any last minute adjustments based on real-time information. So if you're an organization that uses temporary associates, typically those temporary associate requests happen on a weekly basis, which is why it's important for you to really sit down and say, what does my staffing look like today? How many people maybe quit last week? How many people are no longer with us? What is our true need? And then make adjustments to those requests as necessary. That's really going to ensure that you have the right resources and the right staffing available during peak. And that's going to go a long way to try to avoid burnout, right? So the last slide where it said them feeling like the demand is too much on them. Sometimes we just think that it's like, well, yeah, they feel like I'm asking them to do more, and I have to because it's peak season and we just have more orders, we just have more work in general. And that's not necessarily the case. Sometimes when they feel like the demand is too much is when they feel that, hey, I know that we should have hired 20 people and they haven't hired any, and now I'm expected to make up that work. That's when employees really start to feel that it's not fair, right? They don't have a problem with doing more. They don't have a problem with stepping in during peak season and really helping the company, helping the organization for short term. But when they start to feel like they're making up for the leader's lack of planning, for the leader's lack of adjusting or getting somebody else hired on board, that's when employees start to maybe feel negative about the situation that they're in. And then again, lastly, create routines for those all team member events and then planning for the holidays again. So if you know that you're not shut down during Thanksgiving, have a plan to at least acknowledge the holiday and have some pies for your team, right? Or at least have a plan to show up and thank the fact that they're there for those key days, because it goes a long way for your team. And they'll remember that the rest of the year, right? Not only through peak season, but you'll create a more engaged workforce that'll be more successful for the whole year. Well, that is all I had today. James, do we have any questions? I know we had, everybody's probably really busy engaging their team today, but.
Yeah, I think one comment I've seen out here is that people love overtime in the short term, but it is not something that is sustainable. So just really understand the point that Brenda made was you can get by if you don't have enough people and you didn't plan appropriately in the short term. But once it gets to 4 weeks, 6 weeks of people no longer having balance in their life and just working unsustainable hours, you will run into a lot of those problems that seem to crop up at this time of year.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great point, Jim. And, so when you take inventory of your employees, like, the people that like overtime. So, right, they're maybe opposite when they see that, hey, our hiring plan is to hire 50 employees, they're immediately going to say, well, I'm not going to get any overtime this year. And I really need it for those Christmas gifts or for that additional expense. Make sure you follow up with them and you help them understand that there's still probably a plan for overtime within your facility, but that you're really trying to make sure, if you have a really good staffing plan, that means that everyone that wants overtime is going to get overtime, and the people that don't, you won't have to be forced into it, right? Awesome. We did have one question out here as well. Is the meeting being recorded and being sent out? And the answer is yes. So we will record this meeting and we'll send it out via email, as well as have it available on both the work and the Alpine website. Awesome. Well, if there are no other questions or comments, we do want to remind you that we do have another work seminar or webinar November 30th. Dave Frederick is going to be talking about learn how to health and safety that impacts your assets in your workforce. You learn how to impact your workforce from a health and safety perspective. So join us for that November 30th. And if you have any questions, if you are listening to the recording of this and you want to reach out for additional information or questions about this webinar or anything that we say, you can reach out to Jim or I directly, or Alpine. Just go to our website at marketing@alpinesupplychain.com.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Brenda. Thank you, Jim. And thank you to everyone who joined us today for our presentation. And as Brenda said, we will go ahead and get that recording out to you as quickly as possible. We wish everybody a good day, and we will say goodbye now. Thank you.
Thank you.